Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diversity Matters, the show where we spotlight the people, ideas, and conversations shaping a more inclusive and impactful future in housing and beyond. I'm your host, Teresa Palacio Smith, Chief Inclusion Officer for Home Services of America. And as we celebrate Pride Month, I'm excited to welcome someone who has spent much of his career doing exactly that. My guest today is Alex Cruz, the newly appointed Executive Director of the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance. Many of you may know Alex as a realtor, educator, advocate, and one of the driving forces behind some of the Alliance's most impactful educational programs. Through his work, he has helped countless professionals better understand the LGBTQ plus consumers, communities, and the importance of creating environments where people feel welcomed, accepted, respected, and valued. And that is our motto, by the way, Alex, in our organization. And today we're going to talk about leadership, allyship, and homeownership, and Alex's vision for the future of the Alliance. Alex, welcome to Diversity Matters. I'm so glad you're here. And again, excited about hearing about all the work that the Alliance is doing.
Thank you, Teresa. Happy Pride to you and to everyone out there. I'm excited to be here and look forward to the conversation.
And one of the things I did want to add to everyone, but for me, you're more than just, somebody that I've known through the Alliance. You're a friend. And over the years, you have touched my heart in more ways than I can express. And I feel truly
Oh, thank you.
blessed to have you in my life, Alex. I just want you to know that.
Thank you likewise.
So one of the things that I want to first is congratulate you on your new role as executive director of the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance, also known as the Alliance for those of you out there. And of course, we want to give kudos to Mary Mancera, also a very good friend who has since retired from the position and going to do some other things for her self and personal life. And one thing I do want to know about you is what does this opportunity mean to you personally, and what excites you more about this next chapter in your career?
Well, I think first of all, personally, I think it's hard to wrap the emotions around it because it is if you told me some odd years ago and that I would be in this position, I think it gives visibility as as someone growing up LGBTQ, as a gay child, and now a man, trying to find what a role model will look like or identify myself in what is out there. So it's a little emotional on that. I would have not thought that I would be in a position that of visibility that helps perhaps me help other people see, hey, I could achieve this, or I could I can do this as well. So it's kind of cool when it comes to that.
And not only that, but you were also very tied into the Latino community. A lot of people
Mhm.
don't realize that you were
Yeah.
also Cuban.
Yeah. Yes, and growing up Cuban, especially with, when I know we've talked in the past about how machismo that environment is, and being able to be, gay in that community and that, in that culture is difficult, and that's why I didn't come out till after high school and all that, because it's the fear of the unknown of what could happen, with the mix of your family and the culture there.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I know you very well from is the fact that you served in a variety of leadership roles before you were the executive director. And what looking back on those experiences, what shaped that passion for advocacy, education, and community building? What caused that excitement for it?
Well, I think it goes back to experiences growing up, and certain things that's happened in my life growing up. I didn't want other people to experience that, and I wanted to give that visibility to people and know that it's okay, and also help educate folks to in understanding the community, and how the community looks to find safe space and housing, as well from an experience when I first bought a house. So a lot of this arose from experiences that I wanted to correct and also make sure other people, as much as I can possible, not have those experiences.
Well, you have gone beyond that because one of the things that I remember you created early on in Ohio was one of the first programs that really kind of educated realtors on the LGBTQ plus community, right? And so that way they would understand consumers better. So why do you believe education really remains one of the most powerful tools for creating understanding and lasting change?
Uh, well, I think at the end of the day, education helps with with understanding. It clears up confusion. It also allows it bridges a gap of the lack of understanding. I find when you give people the information, the context, the opportunity to ask questions, they become more confident and effective in that. So I think education removes the fear. It creates empathy. It helps people better understand experiences that are different from their own. And that's true, in real estate and honestly in life.
It helps drop those walls too, because I've been in the
Yes.
sessions with you before where, I felt, gosh, you didn't even you listened with empathy with when people would cry, like literally would be crying and saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
my son, is gay," and I had a hard time really embracing that and right and how this class has really helped me even further understand because you really explain so many things that people are afraid to know, right? And so I think it's really important for people to know how those educational courses really do help in understanding even the vocabulary and what it means. And talking about the fact that you are a realtor, what does, as we celebrate Pride Month, we do often talk about visibility and belonging and how important it is. But what does the word home mean to you? And why is this such an important concept within the LGBTQ plus communities?
Well, for many people, home simply means where they live. For many LGBTQ people, home creates a much deeper connection. It's safety, it's acceptance, it's the ability to be your authentic self without fear or judgment. And historically, the members of the community always didn't have those experiences in acceptance, in every space. So when someone finds home where they can truly belong, that's powerful.
It really is. And so many, as I learned the history, so many young individuals were kicked out of their own homes, right? And so that home is such an important piece for that reason. And from your perspective, what are some of the most important housing and homeowner issues that are currently impacting the community?
Well, there's been a lot of rollback in policies and in protections coming from HUD, but also I think what people need to realize is, there's still laws, and even though HUD might not be enforcing this or enforcing that, there's still avenues that can be taken legally. So I don't want people to see that as a doom and gloom and like, oh, they're rolling back and we need to go back into the closet or we need to be more we need to be careful. We need to be vigilant always. But there are other avenues legally because, HUD rolling back policies doesn't change the laws. And in many states, there's still laws in cities and ordinances that still protect, individuals. So, they need to be aware of those laws so they could take action that way.
Which is so important because, there are so many people that feel, especially employees within companies that are now not stating that they're LGBTQ plus because they are scared, right? Because they're scared of what's happening and will they be judged in a different way? Which I think is so important for us to really make sure people understand. And one of the things that I know that you've become known for is helping people navigate conversations that sometimes people may feel uncomfortable doing, right? Or having. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about the LGBTQ plus community? And what do people, or what do you wish people really understood better?
Well, it's we're all the same at the end of the day. We just can't control who we love. So, that's bottom line what it is. So you might hear stories or see things, and but they're not all true, especially in the way that social media and things online that just a random person posts and it goes viral, and then it could be just all full of misinformation. So you kind of want to go back to the education part, you know ask questions, don't just be afraid. If you think about when in the well, or when they were going to do integration, with people of color and white people into schools and all that kind of stuff. That was all fear, because you didn't know. But you know what? I'm the same skin, hair, blood. We're all the same individuals. So meet somebody where they're at, get to know somebody before you pass judgment on someone.
It's so true. And it's so important that people understand the work that the Alliance does because you are really there to support housing and to help consumers and also to help realtors in the process of working with the LGBTQ plus consumers, as well as really understanding the laws and also having a safe space. Tell me a little bit more about the course that you do because I think it's important people to know about it if they really wanted to, educate their own companies. I know that you really do a great job with that.
Absolutely. It is now called, and it's basically a version of what I created in Ohio, and then we took it national when the Alliance formed, the Alliance Certified Ally course. And I do teach it via Zoom through the Alliance website once a quarter. Actually, it's tomorrow. If anybody out there wanted to sign up for tomorrow, but the other dates are on there. And it's basically a core competency 101 to kind of first understand, where the community came from or in the history of the community, and then tying it into the real estate transaction because it is still legal in 30 states to discriminate against LGBTQ individuals in buying and selling a home. We're not a protected class under federal fair housing, even though it's in the Realtor Code of Ethics. So understanding that, I think that takes a lot of people by surprise because they're just a realtor and they're like, hey, it's in the Code of Ethics, but it's still legal to discriminate against those individuals. So this kind of breaks it down so you understand how LGBTQ individuals experience a real estate transaction as well.
Well, I think, how do they find out about the class? Where do they sign up? Or if somebody wants
Uh,
to take,
they could go to the education tab on realestatealliance.org,
so
and it's listed there.
realestatealliance.org. So if anyone's interested in learning about the class, and is there a fee to it?
Yeah, $75.
Okay.
Then it gives you get certified, you get a
Certified.
certification, and you get a little logo that then you could use that on your email signature line, your website. You could put it out in the marketing to let, especially, as an ally to, let members of the LGBT community that you're a safe space. And that's important. They're not looking for, we're not looking for special treatment, preferential treatment, anything like that. We just want to know that someone who is going to help me in a real estate transaction is a safe space and understands pronouns, understands, how to ask questions that, a little more delicate or, without having to use coded words. Me and my roommate want to buy a house. So anything like that, because, just fear of that kind of creates those.
Well, that's really important too, because we hear the word allyship often, and you just said it yourself. And for those people that may not understand what that really means and the differences, types of allyship, I think that's important. One of my biggest honors, I have to say, was receiving the Ally of the Year award from the Alliance 2 years ago. I will tell you, I was so honored to receive that award. But for those who don't know, what does it mean to be an ally? And how do you use it in practice? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but for those that are not familiar, that would like to be more prone to be an ally.
Absolutely. To me, it's, meaningful allyship is action. It's easy to support someone when it's popular, convenient, or trendy. Real allyship shows up when it's uncomfortable or when someone's voice needs support. And for realtors, that could be as simply as treating every client with dignity and respect. For broker leaders, that's creating environments within your brokerage and your offices where everyone feels welcome and valued. So, and, and again, allyship's not about having all the answers, but it's constantly showing up and being willing to support others.
And that's really important to also differentiate because I know that as we talked recently, a lot of things have shifted in that companies are not, they're dropping parade, supporting pride parades, or they're not adding their pronouns to signatures. What does that really mean? Like, if you really want to, because it's important that you show that you really are accepting of others, but truly, what does being a supporter and an ally really mean? Because that is really critical to understand when it's tough, because you just said that, but let's go deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I like to recognize I am a Berkshire agent as well. And I'm proud to be at a company that still has a diversity chief inclusive engagement officer, where, a lot of companies don't have that anymore, or have scaled that back, or has shifted or changed the names or anything like that. So, I'm proud, in addition to being the executive director of the Alliance, and being a Berkshire Hathaway agent, and knowing that, the company still supports, when it comes to that. But allyship is, and just deeping dive is that is just, standing next to me, and even when I'm not in the room, standing up for me. Because sometimes that happens as well too. It's easy to stand up for me when I'm in the room, but when I leave the room and then someone says something, are you calling them out for saying something hateful? Because some people feel I'll just say things politically correct around spaces that I have to, but then be a bigot behind closed doors. So it's those allies are the ones that would then stand up once I leave the room and the bigotry comes out.
I think that's beautiful because that does happen so much in environments. And so making sure that you always are there for that person, and that you're supporting them when they're not even there, right? Um, that's beautiful. As you step into this role, what is your vision for the Alliance, and what opportunities give you the greatest sense of optimism for the future?
Well, there's hope, and what gives me, optimism, and what gives me hope, is people. As I travel around the country and I meet agents and brokers and association leaderships and industry partners who genuinely want to make a difference. I also see tremendous opportunity in collaboration and education. You know, the more we bring people together, the more we realize that we have far more in common than what divides us. And so I believe the future belongs to organizations and leaders that focus on building those bridges. And that's exactly why I see the Alliance kind of making that impact and continuing to contribute to that.
One of the things that you all do so well is advocacy. And you also join forces with other organizations in allyship and partnership. And I think that's so critical because the first time I ever went to Washington, D.C. to participate in visiting the representatives that actually are there to support our vision and they're members of Congress. And I honestly was so scared to death of doing that. And it was with NARA because I was there, I was president of the local chapter. And I will tell you, I was very intimidated by doing it, but I also realized how powerful and important it was to do that. And you do that so well. And we just came from the Alliance's, policy conference. Talk a little bit about that. And what was the biggest thing or takeaway from you hitting Washington on a regular basis and letting people know why it's important that the organization exists and the LGBTQ plus community?
Absolutely. That's one of the great. I'm a policy nerd too. That's why I attend, ours and the one from NAR and stuff like that, which is a small percent of people. But I think it's important to show that visibility. Our members enjoy when we give them our policy procedure, positions, and they walk the halls at Capitol Hill and meeting with their congressperson or their senators, and being able to give a voice to the community and a face. Because it's easy to be like, oh, we'll just delete this, but there's not that connection to somebody. When somebody's standing in front of you and being like, hey, you're impacting me, and how I live, and you're diminishing me as an individual, it's more powerful and and impactful. So that's a lot of members love when we walk the halls of the Capitol, and then that's followed by a symposium where we get we leaders across the industry, and different things, and talk about how policies impact the community. Like right now, we had the Willem Institute and PFLAG on a panel that talked about how, since we're not in the census and we're not being we're being erased by a lot of governmental things, there's not a lot of data on the community itself, which impacts impacts the community. So if it's not for smaller institutions, like or people collecting data on their own through lending information, or the Willem Institute does a great job in collecting data and doing their surveys to give visibility to community too, is you're basically erasing us as individuals.
And it's so important to even, which I never understood until I started to participate through the work of organizations like the Alliance, where you go to the Hill and you actually have policies and points in place that are really important and critical to the organization. But it starts even on the local level. And so I
Mhm.
think people don't realize how effective and how important they are, because we are the ones that are voting these individuals in, and they really pay attention to you, especially if you're coming from a district where they're, local, state, and then you're hitting them in Washington, D.C., in their district where you affect their vote. So again, I think it's really important. And the Alliance has done really great work in even shifting support from policymakers who are not supportive or who really are discriminatory in the way they approach different communities. So I think I want to give kudos to that, because it's so important. People
Thank
don't
you.
realize how that really affects everyday life for individuals, even in the housing laws that are passed, that people think, oh, this isn't going to affect, but every little thing that's done can really have an impact on each of us. So again, thank you for that work. And with that, I've got the last question, and then we're going to do some fast five.
Okay.
I know that you have gone through this different levels, and I've seen you grow, Alex, just like I did when I became NARA president, and the amazing impact that it has had on me as well as you. So, what would you advise others who want to be doing what you're doing to do, so that they can actually, join an organization and become their leader?
Absolutely. Well, it's also getting involved. It's easy to say, oh, I want to make a change. I want to make a change. I want to change. But if you don't get involved to make that change, it's never going to happen. So it starts with it starts with involvement, and and participating and showing up. And that's what it is. And at the end of the day, volunteering is hard, because it's taking time out of your day, non-income income producing, especially as a realtor, to get involved. But that's when you're passionate about something, and you want to and you want to be the change you want to create.
And
You
you
know,
see it with
yeah,
you because you started in the NAR, like National Association, local, then, and now
yeah.
you're on the national level, and now you've got this role on the Alliance. So again, that's where it starts, everyone, really volunteering and understanding that it starts even at the, local level, then moving up the ladder so that you can really make an impact. And of course, you've done that, Alex. So here's my fast five. We're going to just ask you
Okay.
fun questions. I always like to end the session and just come up with the first thing that comes to mind. Tell
Okay.
me, what was the first Pride event you ever attended?
First private event. I was living in Fort Lauderdale at the time, so it was Stonewall Pride that they have down there.
It was called the Stonewall.
Yeah, it's Stonewall Pride. Yeah, but it's actually on it's on Father's Day weekend in June. So that was one of my first Pride events.
Love that. A book everyone should read.
Uh, A Color of Law.
Beautiful, right? That one
Yep,
is one of
yep.
my favorites. Gino introduced me to that book many years ago. A leader who inspired your journey.
Geez, oh, that's a tough one because there's leaders from real lead country leaders and business leaders to people who impacted me as an individual too. So that one is hard to single a person out, especially off the top of my head.
No worries. Favorite city to visit?
I love New Orleans. There's something about New. I love New Orleans. I was excited when we were in New Orleans a couple of years ago. There was something about New Orleans, the vibe, the history, the character, the charm, the food, the culture that is, of the city of New Orleans.
I couldn't agree. I was raised in Mississippi, and New Orleans was our spot to go because it
Yeah,
wasn't far and it was,
yeah.
we could drive there, so it was easy to get to. So one word you hope defines your legacy.
I was authenticity. I think everything that I do, it's from a point of authenticity and wanting to help. And I often say I work a for-profit job from my nonprofit heart. So I don't do any, I do everything for other people,
I
so to
love
speak. So
that. I work a for-profit job for my nonprofit heart.
yeah,
That is beautiful, Alex.
thank you.
I might have to adopt that one too. Well, anyway, I really want to thank you for joining us today. This has been so wonderful. And, one of the things I've always admired about you is the ability that you have to help people move beyond fear and also uncertainty and toward understanding. And through the education that you do, you're so empathetic and leadership. You really help so many people create spaces where they feel that they are seen, that they're valued, that they're also heard. And I think that's so important in the work that y'all are doing. And I think that one of my biggest takeaways from today's conversation is that belonging doesn't happen by accident, right? It happens when people make the choice to listen, they make that choice to learn, and they also make the choice to lead, and more importantly, to create opportunities for others. To our audience, thank you for joining us for this special Pride Month edition of Diversity Matters. Don't forget, Pride events are happening all across the country at different times of the year, not just in June. So check out the local Pride event announcements so you know when they're happening, right? Alex, could they happen in November? They happen
Yeah,
depending on where you are. So keep that in mind. As you leave today, I hope you'll think about this. Who in your life, your workplace, or your community needs to know they belong? And what can you do to help create that feeling for someone else? Because when people feel welcomed, accepted, respected, and valued, lives change, communities grow stronger, and we all move forward together. I'm Teresa Palacios Smith, and this has been Diversity Matters. Thanks, Alex. Bye
thank
bye.
you.